Hello everyone, I'm Gemma Beall. Welcome to Beyond Second Cognition. With the current climate that has surrounded the political front, it's extremely painful to watch what this world is devolving into with this Fabian SJW bullshit. There probably isn't a person one. I'm not limiting this to females only because men go through this as well. A person one that has not suffered some kind of abuse from another person. Abuse is not limited to physical hitting. The scope of abuse ranges from physical, emotional, mental, psychological, and all forms of abuse are not always perpetrated by another person. In a previous podcast over on Patreon, I talked about trauma and how we do further trauma to ourselves psychologically than most other people do to us, regardless of what kind of abuse it was. I also shared over on Patreon one of my personal experiences with rape, so I'm not unfamiliar with that kind of traumatic experiences and me making the choice to not allow it to traumatize me and negatively impact my life. This presentation is called Stop the Abuse, and this is more directed to the people that have experienced all types of abuse, including the psychological abuse that is being turned on the public with these sexual assault allegations. And yes, it is traumatizing to the public, and I'll explain why as I move through this presentation. This presentation is not aimed at the abuser, and it's not because I think they don't have a responsibility in this. I do. But the odds that they will take responsibility is minimal at best, regardless of which type of abuse I'm talking about. This presentation is not aimed to hurt anyone or to further traumatize anyone. So please, if you begin to get emotional, take a deep breath, let it out, and continue listening because there is some sound advice to help one get through it, along with some education that will allow one to see the range of abuse. The truth of the matter is, any and all abuse are just experiences. In those moments of abuse, the abuser steals from you. Some moments are short-lived, but some are ongoing. The moment the abuse is over, the abuser is no longer stealing from you. From that point forward, you are giving yourself away to your abuser. I'm not saying that you should not feel hurt, angry, or fear, but those emotions do nothing but multiply into more hurt, anger, and fear if you feed them, and that is something you carry around. Your abuser does not. Allowing yourself to hang on to these emotions does nothing but tear you down as you continue to give yourself away to your abuser. As we are seeing with these sexual assault allegations right now, many people are being re-triggered by the remnants of the abuse they buried a long time ago. What we see going on with this #MeToo movement, we have literally hundreds of thousands of women that have encountered or experienced sexual assault or rape or sexual abuse, and they are now all speaking up and getting mad at what happened to them. In a lot of cases, it happened decades ago. I do know what it's like to be a person that has experienced sexual misconduct, stalking, and rape, and I made a choice a long time ago to not allow what happened to traumatize me, and I choose not to put myself through the guilt, anguish, anger, fear, and all the emotions that most people have that experience go through. I learned a long time ago that the person responsible for the abuse suffers nothing from the act they chose to commit, and more than likely will not, no matter what I feel or what I do. I've seen a meme that says, holding on to anger is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. And ain't that the fucking truth? As we are seeing with these Kavanaugh hearings, there are women speaking up now because of what is going on and getting angry and re-engaging the emotions of something that happened a long time ago and are using someone else as a surrogate for their abuser. Who is being affected by this? Is it their abuser? No, it's not. When you get so far removed from the incident, it leaves no evidence or corroborative support for the allegations, and when it happens years after the fact, it turns into a he said, she said situation, which only amplifies the emotions and further digs you into the trauma of the event. This is why it's necessary to speak up at the time it happens, and if you don't, like I didn't, then let it go. You are worth far more than the trauma you will cause to yourself in the end if you hang on to it and the abuser remains unaffected by it. Even if you do come out decades after the fact, then you not only re-traumatize yourself, your family, and their family, it turns into what we are seeing playing out right now. The whole country is being drama-traumatized by this event. And make no mistake, this was intentionally designed by the Democrats as psychological warfare for their political agenda. My instance of rape happened when I was 14. I did not say anything and didn't even view it as rape until about 15 years later. It didn't traumatize me, if I can be completely honest, and I wasn't going to allow others to goad me into being traumatized by it because that wouldn't help me emotionally. I realized I failed myself in not reporting it, and I wasn't going to drag me or the other person back into each other's lives over a he said, she said situation, and I moved on. I was much more traumatized being stalked at 16 by a coworker. In this situation, it was to the point that the police were involved, but back then there weren't any stalker laws in place. I had to quit my job over this to get away from him, and he found out a year later where I worked and would periodically stop by and hang around just because he knew it terrified me. Since we were both minors and there weren't any stalking laws in place and it was public property, the police couldn't legally do anything about it. The police couldn't issue restraining orders against minors. Eventually, I was able to stand up to him. I was PMSing and having a really bad day, and when he showed up, I ignored him instead of freaking out like I normally did, and when he spoke to me, I was rude to him and ignored him, and when he didn't get the desired response, I never saw him again. Ever. I did allow these events to affect me for a few years after the fact, though the first one I don't consider traumatic like other people experience, and like my stalker experience, these experiences led to other sexual misconduct experiences because of my own choices that put me in the position to experience them. Do not take this to mean I am victim blaming. I am not. I'm sharing my personal story and owning my responsibility for my choices. When I was 20 years old and pregnant with my daughter, there was a serial rapist running around the city near where we lived. I was terrified because of my 2 previous experiences. This rapist was breaking into women's apartments and raping them at knife point. His last victim was my next-door neighbor. It happened in the middle of the night. Our units were far enough apart that I didn't hear anything and didn't know until I saw her the next day. What she experienced was something very horrific, and instead of acting like a victim, she was pissed. She swore she wouldn't let him get away with it, and standing there knowing what she had went through and knowing she had the courage I didn't have when I had my experiences, gave me the strength to say enough. She was his 8th victim, and the only victim that had the courage to testify and put him away, and she was the only one of his victims that testified at all. 7 women before her had the same opportunity and the same experiences she had. They had the same fear that she had, but she was the only one that overcame her fear to put a stop to a serial rapist, thus saving, PSOYCA only knows, how many other victims. She was the person that inspired me to choose to be strong in spite of my experiences, because my experiences were no comparison to what she went through. I didn't know her very well, and although I don't remember her name, I remember her face, and I remember her courage. The thing is, we all have that strength within us to stand up to this kind of stuff. It's as simple as making a choice. This doesn't mean it's an easy choice, but it is still a choice. From finding that strength within, I stopped putting myself into situations that would allow that type of abusive experiences in my life. When we have these experiences, we all go through the shaming and blaming ourselves, and although we are not to be blamed for the actions of others, we still have to own our responsibility in our experiences. This world is unfortunately not a safe place, and until we choose personal responsibility to ourselves and to others, there isn't much hope that it will change. Women are not the only ones abused, and we cannot act like all men are abusers. The events that have been transpiring in the media over the last 3 weeks is a very dangerous situation, and it is psychological manipulation at its worst, yet there are many, many people that do not see it this way. Why? Because the Democrats understand psychological manipulation, and they understand that women have a long history of being sexually abused and also have a long history of burying their emotions where their own abuse is concerned. They also know from a psychological standpoint that victims of abuse, when they cannot go after their abuser, will gladly surrogate another person to unleash their wrath, which is what we are seeing now. You all probably know that the media on both sides are wearing the sexual allegations against Kavanaugh by Dr. Ford to the ground. It's obvious who is on whose side. The leftists are backing Dr. Ford and the right is backing Kavanaugh. I personally do not see how anyone in their right mind could witness all this and not know this is a political act, plain and simple. We see the female Democrats come out backing Dr. Ford with their statements like, "I believe her," and that is their only reason for believing her. I see others, not necessarily in the news, but in the comments threads, stating that they believe her not because she's credible, but because they too suffered some kind of sexual assault and they are going to back the victim no matter what. I've seen others that believe her because they think all teenage boys, especially ones that are drunk or have been drinking, are prone to those kinds of behaviors, especially back in the 80s, and they believe this so strongly they are willing to ruin his life regardless if he did this or not. That's not a very good mindset to have, and it's a very dangerous, slippery slope that the human race will not be able to recover from if it takes root. I was leaning that way myself until I began reanalyzing my own drunken teenage years and realized for every one boy that would do something like is being alleged, I knew 10 boys that wouldn't. That behavior in drunken teenage boys isn't the rule, it's the exception, and it needs to be treated as such. I have watched both testimonies from an observational standpoint. From those of you new to this channel, this means I don't set preconceived notions on either party. I weigh the testimony not just from a psychological perspective, but from an energetic perspective with my trait of being an empath. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's someone that is sensitive to emotional energies of others. When you observe, you take in data. You do not jump to conclusions or try to process the information at the time. You take it in and contemplate it after the fact. I went in thinking that knowing the times back then, she probably did experience what she claims to have experienced, but I seriously question whether she was pointing to the right assailant or not. In watching Dr. Ford's testimony, these are my observations. I have seen some other analysis by others, some experts and some not, and my observation do match some of theirs, but this analysis I derived before I watched the analysis done by others. 1. She addressed the Senate with a baby voice. Most women her age do not have a speaking voice that makes them sound like a little girl. 2. When she began reading her pre-written testimony, she changed her voice to fry voice. For those of you that do not know what fry voice is, listen to her testimony and then research fry voice. Fry voice is a passive way of speaking, and some feminists have made public assertions that women speaking in this manner make themselves sound weak and timid. This, in my opinion, was a psychological tactic to make herself appear afraid, because she didn't speak like that when she was initially talking, and as soon as she finished her testimony, her voice reverted back to baby voice, not fry voice. Fry voice was confused by some others with sounding terrified, yet she didn't emit the emotions to back it up from an energetic standpoint. Although the fry voice was enough to convince others that she was afraid and emotional in her pre-written testimony, she didn't show any emotion, she didn't emit any emotion, and certainly didn't produce any tears, not even to put on a show. If she were truly terrified, I'd expect to at least see some misty eye. So unless she has a tear production disorder, I'm on the side that it was an act. As someone that has experience with rape and sexual assault, you truly don't forget details. I have read many accounts by others that had similar or worse happen to them just as long ago, and the one thing that we all can tell you is that you don't forget details like when, where, sounds, smell, etc., including the who. You just don't. I know there are many women that have had no memories until after the fact, but once they were triggered to remember and not in a therapist's office, the details were extensive. Number 4. Come on, people. She's a fucking psychologist. By her own admission, she has a bachelor's degree in experimental psychology, a master's degree in clinical psychology, and a PhD in educational psychology, and she's a professor of psychology at university. You can't teach budding psychologists without an extensive understanding of the human psyche, and since most mental health issues that people have are based in the area of trauma, you have to have a pretty incredible knowledge and understanding of trauma to do that. The act she put on in her testimony belied her 8 years of collegiate learning of the field and her 25 plus years of practice in the field. But that's just my opinion. Number 6. In my own research into some of the things I read about after I watched the testimony, I saw something claiming that she had ties to the CIA via heading up a CIA internship at Stanford University. I followed the link to the Stanford University website that had her contact information as Dr. Christine Blasey Ford as the instructor for this program. I also found a link to many articles she had penned to the tune of about 50 articles, although the articles were only accessible by students or faculty members, so I couldn't read any of the articles. Several of the articles, though, were about trauma. I went back to the website today so I could link it in the video, and guess what? The link to the articles has been removed. I guess their Dr. Christine Blasey, that also teaches at Palo Alto University, could be a different person, but I don't understand why the articles are gone and the web link is no longer active. Last but not least, I have never seen any teenage girl at a party or out and about in public with a girlfriend go to the restroom alone, especially not when boys are present. Doesn't happen in this reality. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen an adult woman out and about with girlfriends go to the bathroom alone either. It's so common, it's a pop culture joke. No kidding, look it up. Now, I also watched the Judge Kavanaugh's also pre-written testimony to the Senate. From an energetic and emotional energy standpoint, I don't feel that he was lying. There may have been things he fudged because no matter what he says, he knows people will believe what they will believe, and they already have their minds made up. They were so focused on his youth and not on the things he's done as an adult. His anger, in my opinion, is warranted. He is being condemned for his emotions, yet she is not being condemned for her lack of emotions, considering how terrified she claimed to be. When you watch his testimony, he became overwrought with emotions to the point that he had difficulty speaking, but those points of emotions were only when he was speaking about his daughters, his mother, and his father. I don't blame him for those emotions. I do the same thing at times when I'm speaking of my loved ones, but from an energetic standpoint, he was emitting those emotions. Though most people focused on his emotions throughout the testimony and probably didn't analyze his speaking points when he encountered them, and that, in my opinion, shows a man that loves his children and parents very much. Does that make him guilty or not guilty of the allegations? No, but it speaks volume about his character now, at least in my book. Another point that the Democrats have tossed out to the ignorant public to make him look guilty, and they pressed him on this in the hearing, is trying to make him demand an FBI investigation. The Democrats have been demanding one all along, as has Ms. Ford, and the Republicans aren't, and the Democrats are using that to make them look shady. So let me educate you about a thing called jurisdiction. I'm going to dumb this down so even a 5-year-old can understand it, so don't get mad if you do understand this, because the ignorant public does not. Jurisdiction is a legal term that is defined by Black's law as the power and authority constitutionally conferred upon or constitutionally recognized as existing in a court, or judge to pronounce the sentence of law or to award the remedies provided by law upon state of facts proved or admitted, referred to the tribunal for decisions, and authorized by the law to be subject of investigation or action by the tribunal and in favor of or against a person or resident who presents themselves or who are brought before the court in some manner sanctioned by law as proper and sufficient. Damn, that law makes no sense. But of course the law is its own language. But for English terms, jurisdiction means authority. Jurisdictional boundaries are within cities, counties, states, and federal districts. If a crime is committed inside of city limits, the only authority that has the authority or the jurisdiction to investigate and bring charges is the local city law enforcement. If a crime is committed inside of a county but outside of a city's limits, the sheriff's office of the county is the only authority that has the jurisdiction to investigate. Some states have a state investigative authority, like the state of Texas. Everyone's familiar with Walker, Texas Ranger, and that body has the authority to investigate crimes, or the jurisdiction to investigate crimes that are committed that cross city and county lines. The FBI has the authority to investigate crimes that cross state lines or that happens on federal property. This chain of jurisdiction is necessary to prevent any law enforcement agency from stepping on each other's toes or abusing their own investigative authority. As a senator or a congressperson, the entire Senate knows this, as does Judge Kavanaugh, and I'm sure the D.C. attorneys that are representing Ford know this as well, but they are playing on the public's ignorance of jurisdiction by demanding an FBI investigation and then making Kavanaugh appear guilty by not demanding it. He wouldn't demand it because he knows before the hearing it couldn't have happened because the FBI lacked jurisdiction. The FBI can be invited into a pre-existing investigation by another jurisdictional authority, but it is that authority that has the jurisdiction in the matter that can ask for them to join in. A regular person, even a federal employee like a senator or even the president, has no standing or authority to demand an investigation that has not been investigated by the jurisdictional authority. Now, you may be wondering, why are the FBI now investigating the allegations after the Senate asked for this hearing? Well, because the moment Dr. Ford laid the allegations out in a federal hearing on federal property, the FBI was given the jurisdiction to investigate the allegations, not the alleged crime. But I could be full of shit on that. We'll see what the investigation reveals if the FBI will be kind enough to share it with us general public. I found nothing compelling in Dr. Ford's testimony that would make me believe that she had the experience, much less that Judge Kavanaugh did it to her. The whole thing is a political, psychological neutron bomb that has been dumped on the public at large, and anyone that can't see that is still sound asleep. Every single person in the world that has emotionally reacted to this is being psychologically manipulated and abused, and the Democrats have specifically designed this to do just that. For a brief time there, I thought that perhaps Dr. Ford was just a pawn in this, and that the Democrats designed, and that she too was more than likely a victim of the psychological abuse. But the more I sense this out and I see the psychological fallout from this, makes me confident of saying that she was more than likely an active and integral part of this dirty psychological bomb. She certainly has the knowledge, and she certainly has the credentials to help pull something like this off. The aim in this cognitive and psychological war is to pit American against American, man against woman, race against race. Why? All in the quest for power. What makes this whole debacle so dangerous and such a slippery slope is there is not a person, one, male or female, black or white or Asian or any other race, that didn't do something stupid as a child or a teenager. This man has been convicted in a court of public opinion for actions he may or may not have committed when he was a child. under the age of 18 was a child back then, and it is a child in our modern times. I personally know a lot of people, and I do not know one person that is the same at the age of 50 that they were when they were still a child. Nor do they act the same as they did when they were a child. If our actions in our youth become the defining factors of our adult life, then we might as well all be shot for our teenage crimes against each other, because I guarantee we have all committed some kind of abuse towards another person, whether it was sexual, emotional, or psychological in nature, and whether it was intentional or unintentional. If those moments define us for a lifetime, that there is no redemption that we can gain in growing our consciousness beyond merely being human or merely being a child. If those moments of our teen years become the pinnacle of our measuring stick, then nothing we do towards good or growth will ever exceed the pinnacle, so why bother? Why even try? We all have a skewed view of ourselves as teenagers, and we all don't want to face the fact that at some point in time when we were teenagers, we were fucking assholes. We were governed by our hormones and emotions, and we weren't taught impulse control. We were taught the rules of the culture of our parents, and as times have changed, we have moved forward and away from those times, but we cannot, and I do mean cannot, penalize others through persecution of innuendo for acts of a child if those actions are no longer present in the adult of the now. If you believe time holds no bars, then look back over your life and hope your teenage past does not one day condemn you in the eyes of public perception. Because if it happens now to someone else, it can happen to you at any time. What is happening right now, especially if you are sided with Dr. Ford for no other reason that you were once a victim, is doing more damage to female equality and setting us back decades, and will have a ripple effect that will last generations beyond where we are right now if this human species survives that long. Do not allow your victimhood to turn you into a victim tyrant. Stop abusing yourself for the mistakes of your youth, whether you were the abused or the abuser, and move forward without perpetuating the abuse onto yourself or onto other people. You had an excuse when you were a child. You don't have an excuse now that you are an adult. Stop abusing others over unsubstantiated and unsupported allegations as retribution for the crimes against your abuser. Stop allowing the psychological abuse being waged against you right now by triggering your emotions of your own experienced abuse. When we don't play their psychological war games, we win and they lose. I want to thank everyone for listening and hanging with this presentation. Until next time, I'm Gemma Beall. Stay the course and don't give up on yourself.